Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving into something really fundamental. That incredible journey from the very start, conception, all the way to birth.
It's an amazing process.
We'll be looking at how our genes, our genetic inheritance and the environment interact right from the beginning. It shapes so much of who we are.
Absolutely. It's the foundation.
We've got some great educational materials you shared covering the start of life, and our mission really is to pull out the most fascinating, the most crucial bits for you.
To give a clear picture of something pretty complex.
Exactly. We want to understand those building blocks, the genes, chromosomes, and then follow that whole prenatal development story.
And the factors influencing it, which are many.
So where does this incredible journey actually kick off?
Well, it all begins with two highly specialized cells. You have the sperm from the father and the ovum, or egg, from the mother.
Right.
When they unite, that's fertilization, they create one single brand new cell. And that's called the zygote.
The zygote, the very first cell.
That's the starting point for a unique individual.
And packed inside that tiny cell is basically the entire instruction manual, right? And that's the genes and chromosomes.
Precisely. Genes are, the basic units of heredity. Think of them like the individual instructions. And they're made of DNA.
The code itself.
Exactly. DNA is the substance, the chemical language carrying all that information. And these genes, they aren't just floating around. They're organized into structures we call chromosomes.
Yeah, okay.
In most human cells, we have 23 pairs of these chromosomes. So 46 in total.
46 in just one cell. And at conception, we inherit something like 25,000 genes. Is that right?
That's the estimate, yes. Roughly 25,000 genes packed onto those 46 chromosomes. It's quite staggering when you think about it.
It really is.
Now, to understand how all this gets passed on and copied, we need to touch on cell division. Most of our body cells divide through mitosis.
Mitosis, that makes identical copies.
Correct. Full set of 46 chromosomes in each new cell. But the reproductive cells, the gametes, sperm and ovum, they're formed differently through a process called meiosis.
Meiosis.
And in meiosis, each sperm or egg cell ends up with only one chromosome from each of the 23 pairs. So 23 chromosomes total in each gamete.
Okay, that makes sense. That's how each parent contributes exactly half the genetic material for the zygote.
Precisely.
Now, what about when things get a bit more crowded? Multiple births.
Right. Twins, for example. There are basically two main ways this happens. You have monozygotic twins, what we usually call identical twins.
Okay.
That happens when one single fertilized egg, one zygote, splits into two very early on. So they share essentially the exact same genetic code.
Nature's clones, almost.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Then you have dizygotic twins, or fraternal twins.
Right, not identical.
No. This happens when two separate eggs are released and fertilized by two different sperm, roughly around the same time. Genetically, they're no more similar than any other siblings.
Got it. One split egg versus two separate eggs. And how is our biological sex determined? That's also down to chromosomes, isn't it?
Yes, specifically the 23rd pair. The first 22 pairs are autosomes. They handle most traits. The 23rd pair are the sex chromosome.
X and XY.
Exactly. Females have two X chromosomes, so XX. Males have one X and one Y chromosome, XY.
And the mother always contributes an X.
Always. The ovum only carries an X chromosome, so it's actually the sperm that determines the sex. If the fertilizing sperm carries an X, the baby is XX female. If it carries a Y, the baby is XY male.
So it really is all down to that one chromosome from the father's side. Fascinating. Now, does the Y chromosome do anything else besides just determining maleness?
Oh, yes. It's not just an on-off switch for sex. The Y chromosome carries other genes, too, involved in various aspects of development.
Okay. So we've got the genetic package sorted. How do these genes actually translate into traits we see? This brings us to Mendel, right? The pea plant guy.
Exactly. Gregor Mendel, back in the 19th century, his work with pea plants was foundational. He figured out the basics of dominant and recessive traits.
Dominant and recessive.
A dominant trait is one that shows up even if you only inherit the gene for it from one parent. A recessive trait needs two copies, one from each parent, to actually be expressed.
Which leads to genotype versus phenotype.
Absolutely crucial distinction. Your genotype is your actual genetic makeup, all the genes you carry, expressed or not.
The underlying code.
Right. And your phenotype is the trait that's actually observable, what you can see or measure, eye color, height, having a certain condition.
So you could carry a recessive gene, be part of your genotype, but it won't show in your phenotype unless you get that same gene from both parents.
Precisely. And that inheritance pattern comes down to whether you're homozygous or heterozygous for a gene.
Okay, what do those mean?
Homozygous means you inherited the same version, the same allele, of a particular gene from both parents. Heterozygous means you inherited two different versions.
Got it. And the sources used PKU, phenylketonuria, as an example of this.
PKU is a really good illustration. It's an inherited disorder where the body can't break down an amino acid called phenylalanine.
Found in food.
Yes. And if it builds up, it causes serious problems like brain damage. It's caused by a recessive gene.
So both parents need to carry it.
For the child to have PKU, yes. If both parents are carriers, meaning they each have one copy of the recessive gene but don't have PKU themselves, there's a 1 in 4 chance with each pregnancy that the child will inherit 2 copies and have the disorder.
Wow. And what are the other chances?
There's a 50% chance the child will inherit just 1 copy, becoming a carrier like the parents, and a 25% chance the child won't inherit the recessive gene at all.
That really highlights the probabilities involved. But many traits aren't that simple, right? Like height or intelligence. It's like more than one gene is involved.
You're spot on. Most complex traits like height, skin color, even susceptibility to some diseases involve polygenic inheritance.
Polygenic meaning many genes.
Exactly. Multiple gene pairs interacting. And on top of that, there's the environment's role. This brings in the idea of the reaction range.
Reaction range.
Your genes set a potential range for a trait, say how tall you could potentially be, but where you actually end up within that range depends heavily on environmental factors like nutrition.
So genes load the gun, environment pulls the trigger, sort of.
That's one way to think about it, yes. We also briefly mentioned X-linked genes. These are genes found only on the X chromosome.
And they're usually recessive.
Often, yes. And because males only have one X chromosome, if they inherit a recessive X-linked gene, they're more likely to express the trait because there's no second X chromosome to potentially carry a dominant overriding gene.
Like colorblindness, for example.
That's a classic example of an X-linked recessive trait.
Okay, this is building a clearer picture. From single genes, we then had this massive project mapping the entire human genome. What did that tell us?
It was a monumental effort, sequencing basically all the DNA in our chromosomes. One of the big takeaways was the number of genes, around 25,000, as we said.
Which sounds like a lot, but...
But maybe not as many as you'd expect.
Yeah.
It's comparable to, say, a fruit fly, and actually less than some plants like rice.
Really? Less than rice? How does that work?
It suggests that human complexity isn't just about the number of genes, but more about how those genes are regulated, how they interact, and how they're switched on and off in intricate ways.
So quality over quantity in a genetic sense. What else did genome mapping achieve?
It's been huge for identifying genes linked to diseases, understanding susceptibility, and it really fueled the field of behavioral genetics.
Behavioral genetics, studying how genes influence behavior.
Exactly. Trying to connect specific genes or genetic variations to behaviors, personality traits, and even psychological disorders.
And the materials had that table linking genes to specific conditions. That was quite eye-opening.
Yes, some links are very direct, like the HTT gene mutation causing Huntington's disease.
A devastating neurodegenerative disorder.
Absolutely. Others are more complex. For early onset Alzheimer's, specific genes like APP or PSEN1 are strongly implicated. Fragile X syndrome, linked to intellectual disability, comes from mutations in the FMR1 gene.
What about things like ADHD or alcoholism?
There, the picture is more complex. Research suggests links to genes involved in neurotransmitter systems, dopamine for ADHD, serotonin, and GABA for alcoholism. But it's likely many genes interacting with environmental factors, not a single ADHD gene.
Right. It's rarely that simple. Schizophrenia was mentioned too.
Yes, schizophrenia has a strong genetic component, but it's very complex. Over 100 genes have been associated with risk, like the DRD2 gene involved with dopamine receptors. Again, it's about vulnerability, not destiny.
And the list included others like Down syndrome, sickle cell anemia, Tay-Sachs.
All examples of conditions with clear genetic origins, often involving chromosome abnormalities like Down syndrome or specific gene mutations.
Understanding these links must be crucial for families affected. That brings us to genetic counseling.
Yes, genetic counselors play a vital role. They help people understand their risks for inherited disorders, interpret genetic test results, and make informed decisions. They often use tools like karyotypes.
Karyotypes, that's like a picture of all your chromosomes.
Exactly. It lines them all up so you can spot any abnormalities like missing or extra chromosomes or structural changes.
And for parents-to-be, there are tests during pregnancy.
Several prenatal tests, yes. Amniocentesis is one, where they test a small sample of the amniotic fluid surrounding the baby.
That fluid contains fetal cells.
It does. So you can analyze the baby's chromosomes and genes. Then there's ultrasound sonography using sound waves to create an image.
The standard ultrasound picture we see.
Right. It checks physical development. Chorionic villus sampling, or CVS, takes a tiny sample of the placenta.
Which also has the baby's genetic material.
Yes, because the placenta develops from the original zygote. CVS can often be done a bit earlier in pregnancy than amniocentesis. There are others too, like fetal blood sampling, but those are the main ones.
It seems the field is moving fast. Genetic counselors are now screening adults for future disease risks.
That's a growing area, yes. Identifying predispositions to conditions like certain cancers or Alzheimer's that might appear later in life. And there's increasing focus on potential therapies actually trying to correct faulty genes, though that's still largely experimental.
But we already have tests for things like the BRCA genes for breast cancer risk, Huntington's.
Exactly. DNA-based tests are available for a growing list, helping with diagnosis and risk assessment.
It really drives home the power of genes. But as we said, it's never just genes, is it? It's always nature and nurture.
Always. That's the fundamental theme. Behavior, traits, development. It's all a product of that constant interplay between your genetic blueprint and your environment, starting right from conception.
And one of the earliest signs of this mix is temperament.
Yeah, temperament refers to those consistent patterns of arousal, emotionality, reactivity that you see in infants. How easily are they soothed? How active are they?
And that has genetic roots.
It seems to, yes. There's likely a strong genetic component. But how that temperament plays out, how it's expressed, is definitely shaped by the environment, parenting, culture, experiences.
This is that idea of multifactorial transmission again.
Exactly. Most complex traits are multifactorial. Genes provide a range, the reaction range we mentioned, and the environment influences where within that range the person ends up.
So how on earth do researchers try to separate the effects of genes from the environment? It seems like a tangled knot.
It's tricky. Animal studies help. You can control environments more easily or breed animals with specific genetic traits. You can raise genetically similar animals in different environments or genetically different animals in the same environment.
To isolate the variables.
Right. But for humans, we rely more on natural experiment.
Like twin studies.
Twin studies are key. Comparing identical monozygotic twins who share 100% of their genes with fraternal dizygotic twins who share about 50% like regular siblings.
So if identical twins are more similar for a trait than fraternal twins?
It suggests a stronger genetic influence on that trait. Because both types of twins usually share a very similar environment growing up.
Makes sense. What about adoption studies?
Also very useful. You compare adopted children to both their biological parents, shared genes, different environment, and their adoptive parents, shared environment, different genes.
Teasing apart nature and nurture that way.
Exactly. It helps estimate the relative contributions.
So what have these studies told us? Physical traits seem pretty obviously genetic.
Yes, family resemblance is clear. Identical twins are remarkably similar physically. Height, weight, tendencies, even things like blood pressure, lung capacity, and lifespan all show significant genetic influence.
What about intelligence? That's always a big one.
Intelligence consistently shows a strong genetic component. The more closely related two people are genetically, the more similar their IQ scores tend to be, on average.
So identical twins reared apart still have quite similar IQs.
They do, which is strong evidence for genetic influence. Interestingly, research suggests the genetic influence on IQ might actually increase with age.
Increase? How so?
One theory is that as we get older, we have more freedom to choose environments that suit our genetic predispositions, which then amplifies those genetic effects. But environment is still crucial. Education, stimulation, nutrition, all significantly impact cognitive development.
It's always both. And personality. Are we born predisposed to be introverted or extroverted?
Research suggests yes, there's definitely a heritable component to personality. Studies often look at the big 5 traits.
Like neuroticism, extroversion.
Exactly. And neuroticism, emotional instability, and extroversion, outgoingness, seem to have particularly strong genetic links based on twin studies. Some studies even point to specific genes, like one linked to novelty seeking, affecting dopamine pathways.
Wow. The sources even mention specific percentages for heritability of traits like social potency or traditionalism.
Yes, those studies attempt to quantify the genetic contribution, though it's complex. What's really intriguing is that even things like political attitudes, religious interests, maybe even attitudes towards certain social issues seem to have some genetic underpinning.
How could political views be genetic?
It's likely indirect, perhaps, through inherited personality traits like openness to experience or conscientiousness, which might then influence how someone approaches political or social questions. It's not a Democrat gene or Republican gene, obviously.
Right, more subtle influences. The sources also mention cultural differences in temperament.
Yes, Kagan's work comparing, say, Chinese infants who tended to be calmer with more reactive American infants. He speculated if this baseline temperament might subtly influence broader cultural philosophies, like the emphasis on harmony in Buddhism.
Interesting idea.
Very much so, but it needs a lot more research. It's easy to oversimplify those links.
Okay, shifting to psychological disorders. We touched on genetic links, but it's not purely genetic, right?
Absolutely not. If a disorder was purely genetic, identical twins would have 100% concordance. If one has it, the other always does. And that's almost never the case.
So environment life experiences play a huge role too.
Huge role. Brain structure differences, brain chemistry imbalances, stress, trauma, they all contribute. But genetics clearly plays a part in vulnerability for many conditions.
Like depression, alcoholism, autism, ADHD.
Yes, all show significant heritability. Schizophrenia is a strong example, too. The risk increases dramatically the more closely related you are to someone with the disorder.
As shown in that figure 3.11 risk chart.
Exactly. It highlights the genetic loading, but doesn't erase the environmental factors needed to potentially trigger the condition.
And you mentioned earlier that our genes can even shape our environment. How does that work?
It's a fascinating feedback loop. A child's genetically influenced traits can lead them to seek out certain environments. An athletic child might actively join sports teams.
Making their environment more suited to their genes.
Right. Or a musically inclined child begs for piano lessons. Also, children might pay less attention to things that don't align with their predispositions, and their temperament itself can evoke responses from others.
Like a fussy baby getting more attention, maybe more stress responses.
Potentially, yes, compared to an easygoing baby who might elicit calmer interactions. So genes influence environment, which influences gene expression, and round it goes.
It really is a dynamic dance. Okay, let's walk through the actual prenatal journey itself, from that single zygote
to a baby ready for the world. It starts with fertilization, creating the zygote. Then we divide the roughly 38 weeks into 3 stages: germinal, embryonic, and fetal.
Germinal first, that's the first couple of weeks.
Right, fertilization to about 2 weeks. The main event is incredibly rapid cell division. The zygote starts dividing, becoming 2 cells, then 4, 8, 16. By day 3, maybe 32 cells. A week in, it's a ball of 150 cells called a blastocyst.
And the cells start specializing.
Yes, differentiation begins, and crucially, the blastocyst travels down the fallopian tube and implants itself into the wall of the uterus. That's
implantation. Okay, then comes the embryonic stage.
Weeks 2 through 8. This is where things really take shape. It's a period of major organogenesis, the formation of organs and major body systems.
Like the foundations being laid down.
Exactly. 3 primary layers form: ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm.
And they become different things.
Yes. Ectoderm gives rise to skin, hair, teeth, sense organs, the brain, and spinal cord. Endoderm forms the digestive system, liver, pancreas, respiratory system. Mesoderm forms muscles, bones, blood, circulatory system.
Right.
You start seeing recognizable structures: eyes, nose, limbs budding. The heart starts beating. The brain grows rapidly. By 8 weeks, the embryo is about 1 inch long, but distinctly human-looking.
Just 1 inch.
Yes.
Incredible complexity.
Yeah.
And after 8 weeks, it's the fetal stage.
Yes, from about week 9 until birth. Now it's called a fetus. The main job here is growth and maturation. The foundations are laid. Now it's about building and refining.
We're getting bigger and stronger.
Touch bigger. Length increases maybe 20 times. Weight gain is dramatic, especially in the last trimester. Organs become functional. Bones harden. The mother usually starts feeling movement, the quickening.
What else is happening during this long fetal stage?
Lots. The brain continues developing complexity. Neurons form connections. Myelination starts coding nerve fibers to speed up signals. Hormones kick in, differentiating male and female genitalia more clearly. Body proportions change. The head becomes less dominant relative to the body.
It's an absolute mind-boggling transformation. But pregnancy itself isn't always straightforward.
Yeah.
What are some challenges?
Well, infertility affects many couples. Assisted reproductive technologies, RT, like IVF, in vitro fertilization, can help.
Test tube babies, as they used to say.
Essentially, yes. Fertilizing the egg outside the body. There are others like GIFT and ZIFT too. These raise ethical questions sometimes about surrogacy, selection.
And sadly, pregnancy loss happens. Miscarriage?
Yes, spontaneous abortion or miscarriage. It's quite common, maybe 15–20% of known pregnancies, often in the early stages, and frequently due to underlying genetic abnormalities in the embryo. Then there's induced abortion, which is a separate issue with its own complexities.
And then there are threats during pregnancy teratogens.
Yes, teratogens are environmental agents that can cause birth defects. The critical thing is timing and dose. Exposure during a sensitive period of development for a particular organ system is most dangerous. The embryonic stage is particularly vulnerable for major structural defects, and generally, higher exposure means greater risk.
What kinds of things are teratogens?
Can be certain medications. Thalidomide is the classic tragic example. Illicit drugs, alcohol, high doses of radiation, some infections like rubella or Zika virus, environmental toxins like lead or mercury.
So the mother's health and environment are critical. Diet matters.
Hugely. Malnutrition can severely impact fetal growth and brain development. Folic acid is crucial early on to prevent neural tube defects. Mother's age is a factor, too.
How so?
Both very young mothers and older mothers, say over 35 or 40, have slightly higher risks for complications like premature birth, low birth weight, and particularly for older mothers, an increased risk of Down syndrome.
And prenatal support makes a difference.
Definitely. Good prenatal care, emotional support, managing stress, these things matter for both mother and baby's health. Maternal diseases like diabetes or hypertension need careful management.
And substance use, alcohol, drugs, smoking.
These are major concerns. Alcohol use can lead to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD.
Which involves?
A range of problems. Physical abnormalities, growth deficits, and significant cognitive and behavioral issues. Even moderate drinking might lead to fetal alcohol effects, FAE, which are subtler problems. There's really no known safe amount of alcohol during pregnancy.
What about smoking?
Smoking restricts oxygen flow to the fetus, slows growth, increases heart rate. It significantly raises the risk of miscarriage, stillbirth, premature birth, low birth weight, SIDIATs, sudden infant death syndrome, and potentially later issues like respiratory problems and ADHD.
It paints a stark picture of vulnerability. Does the father's health or behavior matter too?
It does, though more indirectly, usually. Father smoking can expose the mother and fetus to secondhand smoke. Alcohol or drug use by the father can affect sperm quality or create a stressful home environment. If there's abuse towards the mother, that's obviously incredibly harmful. A supportive father contributes positively to the prenatal environment.
It really underscores how many factors contribute to this 9-month journey. We've covered a lot, from the microscopic dance of genes and chromosomes
See the incredible stages of development in the womb
to the complex interplay with the environment, both internal and external. It's this constant interaction between nature and nurture from moment one.
It truly is. The sheer biological complexity is astounding, and we're still learning so much about how genes and environment weave together to make us who we are.
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Considering how profoundly we're shaped by both our genetic lottery and that very first environment in the womb, what does that imply about potential and about our responsibility as a society to ensure those earliest environments are as supportive and healthy as possible?
That's the big question, isn't it? Lots to ponder there.
Definitely food for thought. We hope this deep dive has illuminated some of that complexity. Keep exploring these fascinating fields. Thanks for joining us.